All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking through us throughout the day. I know last session was exciting. So to make sure that you're in the right place, my talk today is the case study, how I use SharePoint, Power Automate, PowerApps, and Forms to build a speaker database. So I know there was that fun intro already about me, but I have a little bit more for you. So I am currently a junior at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I am majoring in information science and operations management, business analytics. Some of the fun things that I've been up to over the past few years was that I was an intern at the Northeastern Maryland Technical Council. Then I was a SharePoint intern at Smithsonian Institution at their Office of the CIO. Last summer, I worked at the Library of Congress as a junior fellow intern. And then this upcoming summer, I recently accepted an offer from Amazon Web Services as a solutions architect intern. So I'm very excited for that. A quick plug for my social medias, because I like to be very active on them. To follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn, it's Sarah E. Patrick, and you can see all the other talks I'm up to and all the other sessions and things I like to be engaged with. Here are just a couple examples of fun things I would post about. Throwback when we were back in person, we would win raffles. That's the picture on the right, and on the left was my high school capstone project. Quick plug for the organization that I volunteer for. It's called TechGirlz. They're a really great nonprofit dedicated to creating a spark of interest for middle school girls to pursue tech. They run these free hands-on workshops, and they're virtual now, but they're honestly better than ever because now anyone from all around the world can join these virtual workshops. So if you're interested in volunteering, helping out, joining me and my team, I work with my dad and his company DSA. Please let me know, or just check out their website at techgirlz.org/volunteer. Or if you just know any young girls who might be interested in attending these events, definitely check them out. All right, jumping right into today's talk, I'm talking about my internship with the Project Management Institute. And who are they? They're the world's leading not-for-profit professional membership association, obviously dedicated to project management. So I would need to give you a little introduction to the project that I worked on with PMI. They had events somewhat to today's event annually, where they would bring in speakers and professionals to talk about their project management expertise. So if you are a fellow speaker, you would probably know that to submit your session, you need to submit your personal information and then your talk information, a bio, all that stuff. So same thing with PMI. They had a form to fill all of that out. However, there was a couple issues. The first one being that speakers had to resubmit information for every event. So they would fill out their name, as I said, any other details with that. And once they submit one, good to go. However, what if they want to submit another session? They have to resubmit all the same information, like their name, their contact bio, things that they already submitted. They have to submit that again. And then similarly, if they want to submit the same talk, but maybe for another event in the following year or something like that, they still have to complete all that information again. It's not stored anywhere unless they have it stored on their end, which is not very efficient. On top of that, speakers were not receiving updates on the upcoming events. So they tasked me with finding a solution to this database issue to have their events run more smoothly when planning it for their speakers. So a quick little screenshot here of the old version. You just see a little snippet here of the information that they were looking for, such as name, email, if they were a PMI member, the ID for that, phone number, speaker bio, and then furthermore was the talk information. And simply you would click submit, and as I said, you'd be done. However, if you want to submit more, you have to submit all the information again. Not efficient. We wanted something that would store the speaker's information, so when they wanted to refer back to that information, it was stored in a database and they could retrieve it there without having to be redundant, inefficient, typing it back in themselves. So the goal with creating a speaker database was that first it would organize the information efficiently, so people on the back end organizing the event would have the information sorted well so that it made it smoother for planning. Secondly, we wanted anyone to sign up anonymously. So PMI really wanted to reach out to new potential speakers. And the easiest way to do that is not having them to create an account and sign in, just to show their initial interest anonymously without having to create that username and things like that. We want to store the speaker's information, talk details. That's the big one. We want them to be able to refer back to that information without having to refill out a form again and again. And lastly, be able to sign up for multiple events at once. Again, with being able to refer back to that information, just catching that and signing up for those multiple events without doing it over and over. So first I had to do some research and decide if I wanted to buy some kind of platform to set this all up for me or build it myself. So I did some research looking at Sessionize.com and at the time how SharePoint Saturday events set up their speaker database and just their system to give me some ideas and decide if I wanted to use something like that. Specifically Sessionize, that's a huge one that people use to submit their talks. But keep in mind, PMI is a nonprofit, and they're a little bit on a budget, at least for me. So my theme's SpongeBob, in case you didn't notice. So with that, we didn't really want to buy a model, so that's how I ended up choosing to build it myself. And that's where we get into these 4 technologies that I will be talking about today that made the PMI database work out. So we have SharePoint, PowerApps, PowerAutomate, and Forms. And I'm going to be talking about what each one is, a little overview and brief introduction for my beginners, because at the time I was a beginner. I didn't know anything about any of these. And then how to get started with each of them, telling you the pros I found of each platform, and then maybe some cons that I ran into as a beginner that you should keep an eye out for if you're getting started with these as well. So to give you an idea of what the end result was, I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of how the database worked. So first we're starting with the initial form that one would fill out to show their initial interest. Pretty similar to the original form, we get all of their basic information, and then later after this video is recorded, we also get their talk information as well. You can see that the indication with the asterisks, those are required to fill out versus the other ones we can leave blank for now. We can fill those in later. I hit submit, and then on that front end, I've submitted that I'm an interested speaker for the PMI event. Now, as a back-end admin, I go to my SharePoint site, the PMI speaker database. I'm going to go to the site contents, and I'm going to see a whole bunch of lists, and that's how I organize all the information effectively. So we have different chapter sites, the locations of the events, the sign-up list, which is the interested speakers, the speakers list, which is approved speakers, submissions, all the talks that were submitted. Talks are the approved ones for the events, and then a calendar for the actual event dates. You can see here I have a whole bunch of columns for all of that information I was looking for. I just blocked out the current ones for privacy. And then we can see if we go all the way to the bottom, that interested speaker that just filled it out is already in my SharePoint list from the form. You can see all that corresponding information there. When I go back to my site contents to take a look at my other lists, so now I want to approve that speaker. I think the talk would be very appropriate for the event. I'm going to go to my speakers list. Again, these are the approved speakers. And through quick edit, I can scroll to the bottom to add my new approved speaker. And I have this drop down that looks at all the names from the sign up list, because to be approved speaker, of course, you have to sign up. And I'll click the name there, hit enter, and the corresponding information will fill in. So hopefully that was a really good overview of how this worked. Obviously, I did very surface level of how this worked and how it all came to be, but we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how an interested speaker becomes an approved speaker. All right. Also, I realized I should have comments open in case questions come in. I'll be keeping an eye out for that. All right, so first we're going to start with SharePoint. SharePoint is the browser-based collaboration and document management platform from Microsoft. Also, it's content management system and allows groups to set up a centralized password-protected space for document sharing. So I found companies and organizations will use SharePoint as a central place to upload important documents and then also just use it as its general intranet. So I'm going to go into first creating your first SharePoint site, and then creating some lists, all the different ways to create a list, and the different data types that can be stored in your columns. So first I'm going to start in office.com. I signed into my account and I see SharePoint. So this is how I easily access my SharePoint online. From here at the top left, I'm going to click on Create Site, and it's going to present me with two different options, a team site or a communication site. I found that communication site is great for sending general announcements and things like that, but in this case, I want it to be a collaborative site because I want my approved speakers to be able to edit their information. So that's why I chose a team site for this example. Pretty straightforward with these steps of giving it a name, a description. It gave me a group email. I can add additional owners and members at that point, but I can also add them later as well. The first small little issue that I ran into as a beginner was that I knew I wanted to add a list, but I couldn't see clearly where add a list was. I'm just going to back up for a second. But I realized that we're just under add an app as well. It has the apps and the lists there. So just keep that in mind when I go up to this gear here. So now that I know that it's under add an app, I can look at all of my different options. SharePoint presents me with a whole bunch of templates that are very helpful if you know exactly what you want. Some that I've definitely used is the picture library, links, contacts, calendar. You saw that I used that for the calendar events, other things like that. In this case, again, I was very much in the experimental phase of creating this database. So I'm going to use a custom list where I can create all the columns I think I need for the list. So this one will be my sign up one. Again, all my interested speakers that are just signing up for the event before they get approved. Now that that's created, I'm going to go under my site contents and then the actual list to start adding some columns to hold the information. So the first way to do it is really straightforward. It says add a column right there. And then the dropdown gives me all the basic data types that could be stored in that column. In this case, I'm going to show you a single line of text to set up the first name. Similar to setting up the site, I give it a name, a description. I double check that data type that I want it to be. And then I can also give it a default value. I'm going to save that. So my first column is added. Second way to add it is, again, hitting add column there, but when you click on more, it navigates you to a new page to give you some more advanced options. So we can see some more data type options here, as well as other settings to change below it. So this one I'm going to keep as a single line of text because I'm doing last name. And then we're going to look at some of those additional settings. The first one being if the column requires information, I'm going to make this yes because last name is important. And I'm going to make sure I hit OK. So when you have the option to hit OK or save or apply in SharePoint, do it because it probably won't actually save on its own. Another way to add a column is that if I drop down on an existing column and then do add a column and then the same steps here, it will put that column next to the one that you created. So you can see here that I added an email column and it inserted it between first name and last name. So I found that helpful if you're trying to reorder your columns as you're creating them. On the flip side, maybe you want to rearrange them after you created them, and you can drop down on it and then do move left or right. So email didn't make sense to go in between first and last name, so I dropped down on it and moved it to the right. I found with custom lists that it gives you a default title column and that sometimes it gives you some errors if you try to just delete it or even if you try to rename it. Someone told me that once and I thought it was a good idea, which I think in some cases can be, but overall I found it safer just to hide it and not worry about it. So you saw I did the drop down and then I'm editing the view. So I'm going to unselect title there for it to be hidden. And I can also rearrange my columns here as well. You can see with the up and down arrow. Make sure I hit apply, as I mentioned. If it's there, make sure you click it so it actually saves. So now we can see that the title column is gone and it's arranged in an order that I like. Under quick edit with the plus sign, I can also add a column here. I find this helpful when you're already in quick edit and adding those information. So I just want to touch on that really quickly. I'm showing all of these different ways to show how to make a column, because as a beginner, I found this a bit overwhelming with all the different options. But really, it's just SharePoint trying to be helpful with whatever mode you're in, you can create a column. So that's why I'm going over all of these today. So under the quick edit, we still have all the same options here, which is under quick edit. So that's good if you're inputting a lot of information at once. So another little thing here that I noticed that I wish I was told before I got into SharePoint was that when I clicked on a new data type, you see that little refresh there? Part of me wondered what was happening. And really, it was just refreshing new column settings depending on the data type you selected. So you see here, now that I clicked on multiple lines to edit, I now have the options to change the number of lines for editing. Obviously, that's not an option for a single line. So that's what it's doing when it does that little refresh, but doesn't tell you what it's doing. I'm going to exit quick edit and show you creating a column in classic SharePoint. So SharePoint has the modern version and the classic to show you two different views of it. And classic was the original one, and they kept it for some reasons that people were used to, but also I found that it was helpful for looking over things like this. So I'm going to back up for a hot sec and see under the list tab and click on list settings, and I can get a great overview of all the settings for my column. So you can see here the different columns. I have the titles, the types, and then if they're required or not. And this I thought was a really easy way to go into them and edit them if needed. So I went back to that title column that was default, and I made that not required. On the flip side, first name, I'm going to go and make that required since I didn't the first time around. Make sure I hit OK. And I can clearly see here, as I mentioned, all of them nicely placed out with what their names are, the data type, and they're required or not. And I really like this view as like an overall check of how things are going. Down at the bottom here is where I can create another column. Shocker. So I'm going to go in here and add a speaker bio, a shortened version. You're going to see me click multiple lines of text again. It's going to do that same refresh that I mentioned. See that refresh? There it is. And then make sure I hit OK. So now, as you saw in modern version of SharePoint, I could create those views. You can also do that in Classic at the very bottom here. I'm going to create the new view, make it a standard view in this case. And I honestly like making the views better in Classic SharePoint because it gives me all of these options here where I can name the view, I can check and uncheck which ones I want to be displayed, and then also change the positioning with the numbers on the right-hand side. So I'm going to make email first because this will be my email view for an email list for keeping my speakers updated. And then SharePoint also provides all of these other options to add for columns. I really like adding the created column because that gives me the date and time a new item was created in my list. We have a whole other bunch of options here that I don't get into in this talk, but definitely recommend checking those out too. So now, when I go back to my modern SharePoint, I can look at all the different views I just created. So right now it's on email view. We can go to all items, which is everything that you might have selected, including that title column. And then if I go back to email view, the email one is listed first. So I find that really helpful if you are trying to rearrange your columns really quickly without having to do like separate spreadsheets or anything. You just have different views. So in this case, I have an email view, and that's what I can use to send out emails to my speakers, or I can have name first if I'm looking through it alphabetically. So now we're going to talk about filling in information in these columns. So the first way is clicking new, and that's how you add one item at a time. And you can see here that pesky little title one is still there, and that's because we have to use PowerApps to customize this form, which will be the next demo. But in the meantime, since it's not required, let's not worry about it. I'm going to fill in the rest of the information. Fill it in, my email. I'll even show you the speaker bio. Since I allowed 10 lines, it opens up this rich text formatting. make sure I go and hit save, and then save at the bottom as well. And then my new information of the new item is put in. As I mentioned earlier, if I'm inputting a lot of existing information on the back end, quick edit is the best way to do that. And I'm going to show you here that if I leave one of the required items blank, in this case, I left last name blank, SharePoint's going to tell me that it's not completed. So it's nice that it actually catches that for me. Make sure it has all the information necessary. So now we have that all together, and we're going to show you the list interaction and also interactions within a list. And that's what I found to be most important about using SharePoint versus maybe just an Excel sheet. So the first one is the calculated data type. And this looks at other columns already in the list. So in this case, I'm creating full name. Maybe I need someone's full name for who knows what reason, but I don't want my front end user to have to fill out first name, last name, and then full name. That would be redundant. So I can do that on my own on the back end. And using the columns already existing of first name and last name, I'm just concatenating those together under formula. And then when I hit OK, I can see when I scroll over that those are filled in for me. So that's really helpful. The last one that I want to touch on is the lists interacting with each other, not within it, but with another one. So as I mentioned in the very first demo, the speakers list in this case looks at the sign up ones, because obviously a interested speaker has to sign up in order to be approved. So I'm just creating a column name of the name of the approved speaker, and I'm using lookup, information already on the site, not just within the list, on the site. And then it tells me where I should get the information from. In this case, it's my sign up list. I can indicate some other columns I want to pass along with it. In this case, I'm doing full name, first name, last name, and email. And then I'm going to hit OK to save that. So now when I go to quick edit, again, as the back-end admin approving my speakers, I can go into that, click on the empty box, do a drop-down of all the interested speakers, and then when I hit enter, their corresponding information fills in. So that's how I would go about being a back-end admin approving my speakers into the new list, instead of having to like copy and paste back and forth between spreadsheets. So that was really helpful, and that was the biggest reason why we wanted to use SharePoint. So the pros, it has a rich set of features. You saw all the different ways that I could create a column, and it just leaves a lot of room for flexibility of what you want it to be. You can create your unique SharePoint intranet similar to the first one, because I am basically starting from scratch. I can add the features and whatever I feel necessary to create my own intranet. In this case, it's a database that I know it will be set up to my liking. It enables cross-department collaboration, so more of a broader scale. Companies and organizations will use that to come together to work on the documents all in one place. And lastly, users decide on the best pricing model, which in my case was for free. So that was awesome. Just some cons. The multitude of features can cause a mess. Like I said before, with all of the different options to create a column was overwhelming as a beginner at the time. So I just like to touch on that because I don't want others to be confused like I was getting into it. I feel like SharePoint can definitely be a bit intimidating when you're first starting out. Integration can require extra development effort. As I was talking about with my research, buying or building, obviously with buying, even though it costs money, I could have just bought it and then been done, and I wouldn't have really had an internship. So instead, I spent my summer working on this, which was, of course, extra effort to do that. If one chooses to do customizations, there are costs and investments that go into that, which leads into the last one that may cause the final build to be heavy, and Mr. Krabs would not have been happy with that. But that's obviously up to you, as you are the developer in this case. All right, so now let's jump into our next one, which is PowerApps. That is what you use to build and share robust apps across your organization and can integrate data from multiple sources and include workflows that automate tasks. So in this example, I'm showing you how to customize the form within SharePoint. Not necessarily making an app in this case, although I definitely could. So I'm already back in SharePoint, just where I left off, and I have the drop down right above, and that's where I see the option to either create an app or customize a form. Again, I mentioned that I want that form to be customized, so that's what I'm doing in this case. It's just loading it up for me. And we can see here on the right-hand side, I have a box for the data source, how I want my layout, and then the fields to include. And in the center, I have what I would actually see as the form. You can see I have all these options here. It presents me with much more options, just like in SharePoint. And here I'm going to start editing. So I don't want that title on there, so I'm going to click on that and then click delete on my keyboard. I can also remove them by just unselecting the check mark under the fields area there. Next, I'm going to show you a little bit of, not an error, but a user thing that I ran into. You can see here I'm demoing trying to rearrange those little data cards within the form, and it wasn't letting me move them on it. But under the fields area, I was able to drag and drop them. So I thought that was interesting that I could do it under the fields, but not on the actual form there. The next thing that I really like to emphasize is the steps to deploy your Power App. You have to first save it. And then once it says saved, you publish it to SharePoint. Make sure I hit that there. And then once I've done those two steps, once I go back to my SharePoint, I need to refresh the page. So since here I'm going back into my list there, it's refreshing the page. There's many times I would forget one of these steps and I thought my Power App did not deploy. So I just really like to make sure you know that. So now it looks like how we designed it, much more clean and professional for my users. And that's how my users can then add more information as they go along. This next part that I'm demoing was, again, very experimental. So I was constantly adding and deleting columns. So quickly, as we're zooming through here, I just deleted one of the columns. And when I go back to my form, that column I deleted is still there. It's not updated. And when I save, it doesn't let me save those changes. I even try to save it one more time and I get a more obscure error. You go see here, I hit save. And yeah, what does that mean? So we're going to go back in and change that so we can figure out what the error is coming from. So I'm just going back into my Power App here. And we're going to see that it gives me a little X over the one that I had deleted on my SharePoint. And it tells me another error that doesn't really make sense. Some invalid arguments. What does that mean? So the moral of me demoing this part is that even though I deleted the column in SharePoint, it doesn't automatically delete in PowerApps. You have to delete them on both or add them on both or whatever. So just keep that in mind for those weird errors. And now that I've deleted them on both ends, now it's updated and the error will be gone. The last thing that I'm going to touch on here, oh, there's two more things, I almost forgot. Another one was that data box and the fields area on the right-hand side seemed really important, right? But there's an option to exit out, so I did, but I wasn't sure how to get them back because it was already appeared automatically when I hit customize through SharePoint. So for the longest time, I would just keep hitting customize in SharePoint because I wasn't sure how to bring it back. And that was really not efficient. I found out the way to get those back for you all so you don't make the same mistake as me. It's not intuitive, right? So to get that data box back, you go under the View tab and then Data Sources. And then for the Fields one, we have to click on one of the existing data cards on the form and then Edit Field. And that's how we get those back. Now, the actual last one I want to touch on, at the time when I recorded this, I thought it was a glitch, but I found out then that it wasn't a glitch. It was another not intuitive thing. you can see that I added an option at the bottom here to click to upload a speaker photo. It's a button that I added through my Power App, and it's just sliding along as I scroll up and down. All the other data cards are staying in place, but not my button, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And I found out that you have to anchor your buttons for it to stay in place as you scroll. And I just thought this wasn't intuitive because the other ones are staying in place. I know they're not buttons, but the other boxes, they are staying in place, but the buttons you have to anchor. So pros, you can easily make apps within seconds through your SharePoint or whatever you're working on. You can just create an app. It's really easy. The pages and screens for navigation are easily modified as you're creating your app. And then these apps can be easily shared among your domain and unshared at any time. So deploy out to your organization, or if you need to make some changes, just unshare it, make those changes, share it out again. The cons for PowerApps is first that these apps might not be as fast as you might be used to on your smartphone, so Android and iOS. You can't publish these apps to those app stores because it is only for your domain. Similarly, with being not as fast as you might be used to, it really depends on internet connection. I talked about the anchoring buttons and how that was not intuitive personally for me. And lastly, and the most important one for this project was that it didn't allow anonymous access. PowerApps was meant for just your domain, and so you couldn't send it out for everyone to have access to. And we still needed something to reach out to those new interested speakers without having them to create a login right away. So we still use the Power App for those approved speakers once they did get that login and they wanted to edit their information, add more talk details, things like that. They use the Power App for. However, we still need something else to get that initial reach out. So that's where we turn to Forms. Forms is the online survey creator available from Office 365, and it allows educators to create surveys and quizzes, and then this data can also be exported to Microsoft Excel. In this case, we're using it to get that initial interest from new speakers for the PMI event. So let's go about making up our first sign-up form. So through office.com, I clicked on Forms, and then I click on a new form here. And I found Forms to be very intuitive, really straightforward with creating the title and then a description here. And on top of being really intuitive, I think it's because it was just made to be very simple. So we have just a few options of question choices here. We have choice, text, rating, date, ranking, liker, and then net promoting score. So just a few simple options. And then I'm going to create the questions to correspond with the columns I created in SharePoint. So I have my first name. I can add a subtitle for my questions, maybe a further description. And I can also restrict the answer that I receive. So in this case, if I'm expecting a number, I can say what I want that restriction to be. I can make them required here, and then also a long answer. This next part I like to say how much I like Forms about is that it's smart. It knew that I chose first name, and when I added another question, it gave me suggested questions, last name, and middle name. So it's predicting what I want next, which it's correct. I was going to do last name next. So I select that there, and it saves the options that I had for the first one. So it makes it automatically required for me, which is really nice because that's exactly what I was going to do. So I click on that and add selected. Just going to show you some of the other options here. For choice, obviously I will add what type of question it is. I can add as many options as I like, and I can also add an other option for users to input whatever the other answer is. And I can also give them the option to select multiple answers. For rating, I can change the level and also the symbol, stars versus just a number. I can easily duplicate questions with the little icon there, which is helpful if you have like very long questions or a bunch of questions in a row with a similar format. I can delete them easily with the little trash can, and then also rearrange them with the up and down arrows. So after I show you all of these, I'm going to quickly go through and actually create my form so that it matches the columns in my SharePoint. and then show you what it's like to share it and start getting some responses. So first, before I want to send it out, I want to check that previews. I have the option to preview it on a computer or a laptop, but also preview it for mobile because, all of us have smartphones these days and probably are working on our mobile device. So I can see what it looks like on each one, and it looks great. So now for sharing, first I need to check that I can do anonymous access. So under the settings, I'm going to change who can fill out this form. Anyone with the link can respond. Woo, we fixed it. And I have a bunch of other options here that I can change, but it was really important for us, again, to have that anonymous access. So now with the sharing options, the first one is to send and collect responses, which is the main one that I want for my interested speakers. And I have different ways to send it out to everyone. I can do the direct link. It creates a QR code for me. I can embed it in some code, or I can just send it straight through the email. The next one is to share as a template. So maybe one of your coworkers wants to use yours as a template for one of their own forms. You can use that link to send to them. And the last one is to share to collaborate. So my co-admins that may need editing access to the form, this is the link I'll use for that. And just to show you how easy it is to collaborate on the link, I'm going to use this one and sign in into one of my other accounts, pretending to be my co-admin, and show you that you get all the same sharing capabilities with that link. So I'm going to open up a new tab here, incognito mode, because I am working on my same computer, but we're pretending it's someone else here. And I have that link. I want to sign in with my school account, go Terps. And we're going to see here that I get the same sharing editing capabilities. I can continue adding the questions I need to help my main admin help. And then the otherwise is that maybe I don't work with them anymore. Oh, I forgot to mention, when it's shared with you, it's under the Shared With Me tab. Unless you created it, then it's under My Forms. So just keep that in mind. Forms is trying to sort it out for you. Now I'm going to mention that maybe I don't work with this co-admin anymore. Really easy to unshare, just like with PowerApps. I just use that little trash can button to remove that specific link that I shared with them. And then that user won't have sharing capabilities anymore. Editing, I mean, to edit the form. I'll refresh this page here, and you're going to see that it's gone under Shared With Me. No more. So it was really easy to unshare. All right. Really quickly, because I do think we're good on time, but if you do want to try it out, back when we were doing this in person, people were more like, whoa, this is crazy, but we do this all the time now. But just in case you haven't, you can just use your smartphone and hold it up to the QR code. And then if you can see my phone here, you can see through my camera, a little drop down pops up with you to fill out the form. So it's really easy to use these to get feedbacks if you're a speaker for your talks, or maybe if you teach a class or just want to give some information. Really easy to use this QR code that's already generated for them. If for some reason it's not working out for you, use this link, tinyurl.com/csfeedback20 to share some of your feedback with me, and that would be really great. All right, hopefully you got it by now. I'm going to move on, and as you're filling that out, I'll tell you the pros and cons of forms. Really easy to use. It was fast and responsive. As you saw through that demo, it was just really straightforward, and I really liked it because it was so simple. And lastly, and most importantly, it gave us that anonymous access that we needed. So that's what we used to get that initial reach out to the interested speakers. And then from then, they were good to go to use PowerApps from there. Just a few cons is that, again, because it was so simple, you have limitations. First, it was just questionnaires or quizzes. So there's not much more you can do beyond with forms. It has limited features. You just saw those few simple questions. You can't upload a photo. You'd have to do a linked photo. And I mentioned this through the free version. I believe you can get some more of these capabilities if you get the pro version of forms, but that was not what I was using in this case. And lastly, I forgot to mention that forms autosave, so you just have to be careful with your editing. If you accidentally delete a whole thing, it will just save it right away. So just keep that in mind. Lastly is Power Automate. It's been a while now since they changed the name from just Flow to Power Automate, but I just keep that there just in case, especially since I still say Flow sometimes. But our last one here is the cloud-based software tool that allows users to create and automate workflows across multiple applications and services without the need of the developer help. So it just does it automatically. So I'm going to show you how we get the information from forms into SharePoint automatically. All right, so I'm under Power Automate. I was about to say Flow. And you can create from blank, but I highly recommend using the create from template, because if you're using one that's pretty common and simple, like I am in this case, people have probably already created the steps for it. There are so many templates. In this case, I'm just looking up the trigger, which is a form in this case. And sure enough, the first option is what I want. I'm recording my form responses in SharePoint. So, and you saw the number was before like 20,000 times, and this was recorded a while ago. I think it was over like 3,000 times recently. So again, if you're not doing any complex flows, definitely look at the templates. It sets up all the steps for you. So I'm gonna hit continue. You can see here, as I mentioned, the steps are there for me. I just have to connect it with the correct connectors. So in this case, I'm looking at the PMI speaker sign up form. I'm getting that link for my SharePoint site. There's a second step here as well to fill out the PMI speaker sign up one. I put the site address in. I make sure I'm looking at the correct list. And then it pops down with the corresponding columns in that list. And remember that I mentioned that I made my form to match the columns in SharePoint. This is why I wanted to do that, so that I can just plop them in here, the dynamic content, so that it knows, oh, this answer in my form will go into this column in my list. Really quickly, I want to mention that Power Automate automatically makes this responders email one, and that's looking at if the user signs in. So in this case, because I made mine anonymous, if I use responders email, it would just have anonymous instead of an email. So just keep that in mind if you make an email one instead. Don't use the responders email. But, you know, Power Automate is just trying to help us out. So not that one. I want the email one instead. So I'm going to finish filling those in. And then I want to make sure I save. So Power Automate, unlike Forms, does not autosave. So there's a save option at the bottom there, and then also at the top right-hand corner. I'm going to make sure I save that. The next little intuitive thing that I found was that I wasn't sure how to name my flow. So under Forms, it clearly said untitled, so I knew how to name it. Here, it's where it had that automatic title there. That's how you name your flow. I just thought that was a little slight miscommunication, not quite intuitive. And then just to really emphasize that it does not autosave, even when it's just the name, I tried to exit out of it, and it still didn't save my names. Went back to record form responses in SharePoint. So I'm going to go back and edit it and make sure I hit save this time. No autosave, so make sure I save it this time. And now I'm good to go when I go back. For sharing with the flows, I go under My Flows and then invite another owner. And Power Automate is a little more strict on who you can share it with. With Forms, you saw I could share it with my school email. In this case, I wasn't able to share it with my school email. It's looking for someone in my domain. So I actually used my dad in this one because he's in my domain. So now he's added as a co-editor for my flow. And we go back, and now this flow has been moved under Team Flows tab because now multiple people are able to work on it versus just my flows. So let's see it all in action. I'm quickly going through and filling out a bunch of responses for my form, and I want to see if it actually showed up in SharePoint and what I see on the Power Automate end. So we can see that when I click on the flow, I have a run history of how many times it ran, and then if it succeeded or failed. With each one, I could click on it and see all the really back-end analytics of it. If there were an error, this is where it would pinpoint where the error occurred. In this case, since it ran successfully, I get a lot of green check marks. It's looking good. So the moment of truth, it said it ran successfully. And let's check in SharePoint, and it did. 3 new responses of 3 new interested speakers. So it was really great that now every time someone fills out the form, it's automatically put in the SharePoint for me versus me going back and forth between form responses and then working in SharePoint. The pros of Power Automate is that you can do cross-site and cross-application workflows. In this case, I did cross-application between form and SharePoint, and it just shows you all the different options you can do to automate these tasks. The reoccurrence is great. Every time my form is filled out, it creates a new item in my SharePoint. And templates, as I said in the beginning of this demo, really recommend checking those out because those are super helpful. Already sets up everything for you. Just very few cons for this one. There was a conversation back when we were in person about starting other flows from a flow, like using one of your existing flows as a trigger. And you're able to do it, but with the research I found, it's not very intuitive. So that's why I put it under the cons area with the question mark, because it's possible. It's just not very intuitive, especially for the beginners. And lastly, the predetermined fields issue. I mentioned the one with the email versus responders email. Another one that I don't mention in the demo was you have to be very careful with what data type you indicate under SharePoint. So for example, when I did rating, I thought that would be a number because it's a number 1 to 5. But then under Power Automate, it actually didn't show up. And I found out that it's because rating actually needed to be a choice of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So keep that in mind. If the dynamic content doesn't show up in Power Automate, it might have to do with the type of data type you indicated for that column in SharePoint. Just to end it all, this internship happened, oh goodness, 3 years ago now. I'm getting old. But there, of course, have been changes since then. The first being that they actually deployed using this database. So once the speakers were approved through the form, they were given a sign-in, and they were able to sign into SharePoint and see all of their information and change it and all of those good things. And then we were able to actually use my email list and then Power Automate to automate emails to send out to them about the event to keep them updated. So all of our main goals were checked off the list. If you did fill out my form, I did include a little riddle here, and I just wanted to give you the answer. Why can't cats work on the computer? They get too distracted chasing the mouse around. Ha ha ha. All right, I'm keeping an eye out on the chat, but let me know if you have any questions. If you do think of them after, feel free to contact me through my social media. Again, it's @SarahEPatrick. And thank you so much for joining me today.